All right, welcome back. So now we're going to pick up right where we left off and change our code just one more time. Okay, so let's come back over to the style on the far left side where we have color. We're going to modify that color from the word blue, and I do encourage you to stay away from using words versus using hexadecimal values. The idea that you can use red, green, yellow, blue, cyan, magenta. It is ideally great, however, that allows for a lot of variances between browsers, and so using the hexadecimal value is a known color mixed amount, and so it should look the same across different browsers. So we're going to change the font color, which is also known as just color, to hashtag 191970. Okay. And then while we're over here for the background color, we already have the hashtag in place, so we're going to change this color to hashtag, if it's not already there, E6, E6, F as in Frank, A as in Apple. Okay, so I'll save those, and then I'll come over here to the side and press the refresh button, and you should see that it looks far more attractive with a pale purple background with a purplish bluish darker color on top of it. So that's what color the 191970 is the font color, and the background color is the pale purple color. All right. So as I scroll down into the PowerPoint, you'll see that in this particular slide, it talks about all the different things that we can do for CSS properties in terms of formatting different elements. Okay, so we've just gone through the background color and the color. Now you'll see that we can modify what's called the font family, which is going to be the type of font that you're going to use, the font size, font style, font weight. All those are prefixed with the word font dash. There's no spaces between the words. And then we get into the line height, which is great if you've got a paragraph that you want to separate your content. We can modify the margins. So if you want to make sure that this content is not touching the left side of your browser, we can increase the margins. We can always do text align. Text decoration is going to be the line underneath the words that are hyperlinked. And then we can also specify width on various containers. So we're going to go through some of those in greater detail moving forward. So as we just did, we modified the background color and the color, now the font family. So the idea behind font family is that while ideally maybe we want this to display in Arial or Times New Roman, what if the person's device doesn't have that particular font installed? Okay, or maybe you want to do a more fun font like a Garment or a Helvetica, and those aren't necessarily installed on all different platforms with different operating systems. Some of them are proprietary to Mac, some of them are proprietary to Windows. They're not necessarily open source. So what we do, and we encourage you to do, is you provide a list of several different fonts within the same family. So for example, for this content that we have right here, let's come back over to our index page. I'm going to press enter after the semicolon. Make sure you are terminating every single line with a semicolon, okay? And so for this one, we're going to say font-family, colon, because that's your declarator, or declarator, and then let's preface or specify what the values are going to be. So let's start with Arial. So Arial is my favorite choice, okay? However, if for some reason Arial's not there, then we can say, you know what, if Arial's not there, let's do Verdana. And you know what, if you don't know what Verdana is, or if you don't want Verdana, then maybe we'll go with a default called sans serif. Okay, so sans serif is Latin. The word sans is Latin for not, and so serif is letters that have little wigglies on there, right? So if you look really close at the word new or media, those little feet that are sticking out from the side of the letters, that's what the serif fonts have, and the sans serif are going to be block letters to not have those. So this is how a font family is structured. You always want to make sure you choose ideally two different fonts of your choice that are within the same category, and in this case they're both block letters. And then the last thing you'll do is specify a generic open source word such as sans serif or serif. You can see a list of them are listed over here in the PowerPoint slide. So serif, sans serif, fantasy, monospace, or cursive. So keep that in mind when you actually do a font family. So let's save our code, come back to the page and refresh, and now you see that everything is looking nice and block lettered instead of curly lettered or curly braced. So let's continue on. We're going to come back to some of these other declarations as we go through this chapter. You have font style, font weight, lines, letter spacing, and line height. So let's go down to our H1. Our H1, as you can see, is where it says Trillium Media Designs. And we can see Trillium Media Designs is right here. So let's start to jazz up that particular line of code to make it look a little bit more attractive. So we're going to come back up to the styles section. Now make sure you are between these styles tag, okay? And as you may recall from oh so long ago, when we started doing the CSS for body, we had an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. So make sure you click after that closing curly brace, press the enter key, and we're going to create a new selector style now. So let's do H1. And again, the H1 has no spaces, it's lowercase, and we are referring to whatever we do to this is going to modify this H1 tag right there. So we're going to open up our curly brace, and by default we always want to close our curly brace, and so make sure that you do so that way you don't forget about your curly braces. Alright, so for this one, let's also give ourselves a background color. So background color, and let's do hashtag 191970 semicolon. Let's also give it a color. So this is again going to be your font color, but we use the word color. It's going to be hashtag E6, E6, F as in Frank, A as in Apple, semicolon. Save this. Let's see what we've just done to make sure it looks good. So if you haven't noticed, what we did was we took the background color that we were using on the body tag, which is the purple color, the light lavender color. We assigned that to the font color, and then we took the dark blue color that we're using for the font down here and made that the background color. Looks pretty good. All right. So next thing we're going to do is do our line height. So this was the next thing, is so we're going to type in line height, colon. Now, when it comes to line height, we could specify pixels, but it's best to do it with percentages. That way it's relative to the screen in which we're looking at it. So if we leave it at 100%, it's not going to change it at all. So to double space, we'll do 200%. Okay, so save that. So specify 200% and press refresh. And now you can see that it has increased 200%. Okay. Another thing that we see on this list right here is the text indent. I saw the text indent down here. So I believe that you and I would both agree that the trillium word is very close to the left-hand side. So let's do a little indentation on that. So again, we're going to return to the selector for H1, do text dash indent colon, and let's indent it, let's say, well, okay, so we again could do pixels. We could say 30 pixels, for example. Save this and refresh. Okay, that pushes it in about that much. We could always do a percentage, and again, the percentage is going to be based upon the resolution of the screen, so I'll change this to a percentage. We'll save that, refresh. That really moves it over. However, keep in mind that when I change the size of my browser, it's relative and that it's moving over 30% from the left-hand side. Okay, so let's not do percentage. And then there's another way that we can do this is based on an M. An EM is what it's called. So let's do 5EM. An EM, again, there's no spaces between the 5 and the EM. An M basically says take the letter M, as in Mary, of the current font and the current size of the font that you are using, and that's how many spaces it's going to move it over. Okay, so let's refresh, save and refresh, and now you'll see that this is 5EM. And again, now because I did M's, it's not going to move. It's always going to be in that one location regardless of the size of the browser, because it's not based on percentages of the screen. It's giving it a relative size, but it's not adjusting it based on a percentage. In fact, that's a little too far over, so let's go down to 2 EMs and save that. Okay, so that pushes it back over once again. All right, next thing is this H1 tag, though I like it, the way it looks, and I like this Arial block letter format that we have going throughout. Let's change it up just to get more experience utilizing the font family. So I'm going to go to Font-Family. And in this case, let's go the opposite of block letters. Let's do a serif font. Okay, so let's go with Georgia at first. Georgia. Now I'm going to put a comma here, and this is one of 2 times that you'll ever use a quotation mark in your CSS. Otherwise, no quotation marks. Now you may recall when we did HTML last week, and we talked about attributes, we would say attribute equals value, value in quotation marks. Those have to be in quotation marks. In CSS, no quotation marks, except for this one instance. So when I'm talking about Georgia, a comma, and now I want to do Times New Roman. So Times New Roman. So as I add that into there, because there are multiple words to the font type, if I don't put it in quotation marks, the space that's triggered between Times and New in Roman actually will break the CSS. I know that sounds crazy, but it literally will make the CSS stop working from that point forward. So very few times do we ever use quotation marks, and it's whenever you're identifying any font that has multiple words, put it inside of quotation marks. Like Arial block, you would have to put that inside of quotation marks. Arial, not so much. Arial block, you do. All right, enough said. Last thing we'll do is a serif. So we'll put this into a serif and press save. Serif means it has feet, and now you can see what that looks like. All right, moving along. Let's see. Text decoration. We'll come back to that once again. This is the underline of a hyperlink. All right, next thing is a text shadow. So a text shadow basically allows us to configure a drop shadow on containers as well as elements. Okay. Text shadow. This is something that we can apply to the text within an element. All right, so let's come back to our H1. And again, we're still dealing with the Trillium Media Design, the H1. So let's do text dash shadow colon. Now this way, it actually situates it so that way we have to provide 3 different values as well as a color in order for the shadow to work. So bear with me for a moment here. Let's say we do 3 pixels, comma 3 pixels, comma 5 pixels. Actually, let's do 13. We'll get crazy and we'll go back and change it. 3 pixels, 13 pixels, 5 pixels. And then the last thing is we want to give it a color. And actually, let me remove these commas. They are not necessary, so get rid of those. All right, so the last thing is we need to provide a color of what we want for the shadow. So let's go with a hexadecimal value for gray. So let's go with C, 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 C. So there's 6 C's right there. Put a semicolon in there and press save. And once again, when you refresh the page, we're looking at the Trillium Media. All right, so you see how far away that shadow is moved from the actual words itself. So let's debug what this actually means. Remember, in a browser, the only known spot that we know will always stay put is this upper left corner, right? So right here, where my cursor is wiggling, is the upper left corner. This is our only known. In a graph, in math, our only known is always in the lower left corner where it's the 0, 0 quadrant. Y goes up from there, X goes positive from there. In the web, it's just the opposite. This is our 0, 0 corridor, and to the right is going to be a positive X because we're moving to the side, and downward is your positive Y because that's what we're seeing is the growth in Y. So that being said, this very first 3 pixel that we put into our text shadow was 3 pixels to the right. So that's why the words are scaling a little bit to the right. You can see a little overlap on the right-hand side right there. The next number is your Y. So in this case, we did 13 pixels, which is why it's really far down. If we did the opposite and said negative 13 pixels, saved the change and refreshed, you would see it go way up because that's the negative direction for Y. This is the positive direction for Y is to go down. Lastly, the 5 pixels is how dissipated or how opaque you want the actual shadow to appear. So let's modify this and make it look a little bit more realistic. Let's do 3 pixels by 3 pixels. That's on the X and the Y, and you can kind of see what it looks like. And now let's say for the focus or the blur effect, if we go down to, let's say, 2 pixels, you'll see that it's real tight. It's real close. You can see it pretty well. And the larger number we go with for this, if we go up to, say, 10 pixels on the blur effect, it's going to get real shadowy and just kind of give a nice little glow around there. So that's how you can tinker with the text shadow effect. Later on, you'll find out we've got the same thing for a box shadow based on elements versus on text. All right, so let's save that and refresh, and that's where I'm going to leave it, is at 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 5 pixels. And then lastly is the CCC. So let me talk to you about the CCC briefly right here. So if you recall in the prior video, we talked about hexadecimal values and how we could do color safe words, and they always had to be 0s, 3s, 6s, 9s, C's, and F's. And they always had to be in sets of 2. So 0, 0, 3, 3, 6, 6, 9, 9, C, C, F, F. All right, whenever we do something like that, we can always shorten it down because they're always in pairs. We can say, instead of CC, we would say C. Instead of CC, we would say C. Instead of CC, we would say C. So now we're down to CCC, if that makes any sense. For example, if I were to change this value right here, I'm going to once again modify the background color. If I went with the 003366 idea and save this value and refresh, you can see I got a different color blue. Let's do FF. So we got this pink color, okay? So if I wanted to shorten this down, because I've got 2 F's, 2 3's, and 2 6's, all of them are web safe, I can simply say F36, save the change, refresh, and get the exact same color display. So whenever you see 3 values instead of 6 values, that's what's happening, is they are actually using a shorthand version of it. Put back the original color. All right, hopefully this is making sense and you're able to start seeing these changes. If at any point I have moved along too fast or you need to back it up, feel free to pause the video and rewind and go back and make some updates or changes as needed. All right, so we're going to continue on now. Right now, as we see this page, it's all on the left side of the screen. And really, we want it to be probably centered within the screen. And so we can do this utilizing the div. Now, you'll notice at the very top of the screen, we've got the div ID equals wrapper. Now, back in chapter 2, we said we really never want to use div ID equals header or nav or footer or main. Okay, if you did do that in chapter 2, make sure you go back and change it and do it the right way, where we just simply have a tag called header, we have a tag called nav, we have a tag called main, and we have a tag called footer. All right, this one though is unique in that we've made up this word wrapper. Okay, so the idea that we've got the word wrapper there basically says, let's talk to this and give it a width. Okay, so when we come to talking to this wrapper up top, we're going to go with a hashtag in front of it and call it wrapper. Okay, so this identifies that it's an ID in the HTML code. Open and close your curly braces. And let's get crazy and give it a background color because it just kind of helps us see it better. So background dash color. And let's just go with white. Now if you recall in the last exercise or last video, we talked about 0s through F's. And if you want an absence of color, you're going to use 0s. That would be black. If you want full color, you're going to use F's. So in the case of red, green, blue, having all F's, FF, 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 would equate to white. But again, because we've got 3 sets of double values that are exactly the same and identical, we can simply say hashtag FFF with a semicolon, save this, and then refresh. Now you see what actually is contained within the wrapper ID tag that we have right there. All right. Now what we're going to do is modify this wrapper to have a smaller width, and then you'll start to see that we'll have panels of space called active white space on the left and the right side. So we're going to do width colon 80%. Let's do 85% and save that and refresh. And now you'll see that I've got a panel of space on the right hand side, not so much on the left. Now we're going to fix that in just a little bit when we talk about margins. A little ahead of myself on that one. All right, so this basically takes us through all the different properties. Oops, cancel that. All the different properties we have listed right here, and we're going to continue on talking about in greater detail the red, green, blue that I went through. Again, red, green, blue is always the order in which you go with. If you want all color, it's going to be FF. If you want absence of color, it's going to be 0, 0, and somewhere in between are the values in between. Okay, you'll also see that we've got values of red, green, blue using 0 to 255. That's using the RGB value colors. We don't really dig into that quite yet in this chapter. We'll dig deeper into that later on in the semester. Whenever you're using a hexadecimal value for a color, you always have to precede it by the hashtag, as we mentioned before. I encourage you to take more time, go through your actual textbook or in the back of the textbook and look at some of these different values to give you a good idea of how the color combinations of the digits 0 through 9, A through F, create a nice palette of different colors. Continuing on, there's a bunch of resources within this chapter that talk about monochromatic color scheme or how to create a nice color scheme, so I encourage you to check these out. When it comes to a contrast checker, it's very important that you keep in mind that not everybody can see all the colors. Some people are colorblind to some colors, to many colors, to just one color. So you want to make sure that whatever colors you choose, you've got a nice contrast between the light and the dark, so that way you can read the text and the person that might have a visual disability is able to read your content. All right, so here's an example of an inline style. We mentioned this at the very beginning, and again, I'm not going to apply any inline styles in the code because it's just not a great way of doing things. However, you see that where we've got style equals quote, I can actually type it up for you here so you can see this probably better on my screen over here. Here's an H2, we can say style equals quote, color is referring to the font color, remember, and let's say we're going to make it red so that way it really stands out. So color, we'll do hashtag F as in red, full color, 0 for green, 0 for blue, and that is it. So we'll save this, and this is going to affect, we have an H2 right here, and we have an H2 right here, but because we did an inline style, it's only going to affect the top H2, and so that one turns red. All right, so that's what an inline style looks like, and you can see how very customized it is. That being said, let's take this out of here. I'm going to cut that out, and if you really wanted red text, you certainly could. We can come up to the style tag up here, create ourselves a new selector for H2, say color, colon, hashtag, F00, semicolon. Again, no quotation marks now that we are up here in the CSS section. When you are in the HTML section, I cannot emphasize it enough, you have to have those quotation marks there. All right, so let's save this and refresh. And now because I put it up here inside of the style tags, anything that is inside of an H2 will have a color of red. And actually, let's do green so you can see the differences. So red, green, blue. So now this one and this one will take on the color of green and not red. Pretty neat, huh? All right. All right, so we've been using the style element all along as we've been going through these examples. So feel free to take your time to review these slides in greater detail. But hopefully this has given you a good idea on how to get CSS situated within your page, utilizing some of the different techniques we've covered so far. I'm going to take another break, and then we'll come back and talk about font sizes and font properties in just a moment.